الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجنة من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يسأله من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في شأن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان سنفرغ لكم أيها الثقلان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يرسل عليكما شواظ من نار ونحاس فلا تنتصران فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فإذا انشقت السماء فكانت وردة كالدحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيومئذ لا يسأل عن ذنبه إنس ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يعرف المجرمون بسيماهم فيؤخذوا بالنواصي والأقدام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان هذه جهنم التي يكذب بها المجرمون يطوفون بينها وبين حميم آن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ولمن خاف مقام ربه جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ذواتا أفنان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينات نجريان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما من كل فاكهة زوجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على فرش بطائنها من استبرق وجنى الجنتين دان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن قاصرات الطرف لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كأنهن الياقوت والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ومن دونهما جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مدحمتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينان نضاختان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما فاكهة ونخل ورمان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن خيرات حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان حور مكسورات في الخيام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على رفرف خضر وعبقار حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان تبارك اسم ربك ذي الجلال والإكرام صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عن جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري أنه قال عن فاطمة الزهراء عليها السلام بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله قال سمعت فاطمة أنها قالت دخل علي أبي رسول الله في بعض الأيام فقال السلام عليك يا فاطمة فقلت عليك السلام قال إني أجد في بدني ضعفا فقلت له أعوذك بالله يا أبتاه من الضعف فقال يا فاطمة ائتيني بالكساء اليماني فغطيني به فأتيته بالكساء اليمان فغطيته به، وصرت أنظر إليه وإذا وجهه يتلألأ كأن البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله. فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسن قد أقبل وقال: السلام عليك يا أماه. فقلت: عليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال: يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت: نعم، إن جدك تحت الكساء. فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا جداه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء؟ فقال: وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوضي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معه تحت الكساء، فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسين قد أقبل وقال: السلام عليك يا أماه. فقلت: عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال لي: يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت: نعم، إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء. فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا جده، السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله، وتأذن لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء. فقال: عليك السلام يا ولدي وشافع أمتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معهما تحت الكساء. فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال: السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله. فقلت: عليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين. فقال: يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عمي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت: نعم، ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء. فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال له: وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا وصي وخليفتي والصاحب لوائي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل علي تحت الكساء. ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت: السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال: عليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بضعتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخلت تحت الكساء. فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ أبي رسول الله فطرف الكساء وأومأ بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال: اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي، لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي، يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم. أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم، وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم. إنهم مني وأنا منهم، فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم، وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد. وقال الله عز وجل: يا ملائكتي ويا سكان السماوات، إني ما خلقت السماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئة ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري، إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال الأمين جبرائيل: يا ربي ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل: هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة، هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها. اللهم صل على محمد. فقال جبرائيل: يا ربي أتأذن لي أن أهبط إلى الأرض لأكون معكم سادسا؟ فقال الله: نعم، قد أذنت لك. فهبط الأمين جبرائيل وقال: السلام عليك يا رسول الله. العلي الأعلى يقرئك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام، ويقول لك: وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت السماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئة ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري، إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم، وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم، فهل تأذنوا لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله عليك السلام: يا أمين وحي الله، إنه نعم، قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء، فقال لأبي: إن الله قد أوحى إليكم ويقول: إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد. فقال علي لأبي: يا رسول الله، أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله: والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا، ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض، وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا، إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي: إذن والله فزنا وفاز شيعتنا رب الكعبة. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله ثانيا: يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا، ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض، وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا، وفيهم مهموم إلا وفرج الله حما، ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غما، ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته. فقال علي إذا الله فزنا وسعدنا، وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sir Fatah is requested for the Salah Sawab of the marhumin listed on the screen and for all marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Imam is requested for the names listed on the screen and for all those who need here and elsewhere. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ يَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ يَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. The Women's Circle is hosting an empowering evening for Breast Cancer Awareness Month in partnership with Advent Health on Wednesday, October 23rd at 5:30 p.m. in the Ladies' Dining Hall. Engage in an important discussion on breast cancer awareness with Dr. McCrae and enjoy delicious dinner provided for all attendees. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Please sign up at the link displayed on the screen. For more information, contact Sister Sakina Nur Muhammad at 407-690-3360. At this time, I'd like to call Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani for tonight's majlis with Allah salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here or across the globe, wherever you may be hearing my voice, Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is the power of hope? There's some questions that are fundamental in life. A few of them maybe: does length of life matter? Yes or no? And another question that maybe come to life that's fundamental that people ask is the idea of, how should I live life? How should one live life? What is my approach to life? And another question that you may find in our existence, oftentimes, amongst many other questions, is the notion of how do I interact with other people in life? That is, I'm not living life in isolation. I'm sharing this life with other creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, humans, animals, the environment, and the likes. And so I want to shed light on these three main questions. In particular, does length of life matter? This idea of coming to, how is it length? Or are there other elements that one can look at from the perspective of what matters about life? The second is, how do we approach life? What's our strategy to approach life? How do we look at the future? How do we look at the current environment? And the other element is, how do we interact with others? My thesis here is that all three of these questions, we can look at the life of Imam al-Askari, who we are here to commemorate, and get gems for our life in order to understand these, in order to live about the concept of these three major questions and how the Imam's life and existence gives us some guidance in this era and in all eras about how to live and how to flourish in life. Having said that, this is our agenda for tonight, to cover these aspects, these three aspects of the life of the Imam, to understand in his Wiladat, in his Jashan, that is, what is it that he teaches us about life and ultimately living it through difficulties, adversities, and challenges, but still not losing hope of where we are to go. This is our agenda for tonight, inshallah. Wherever you are, here or across the globe, send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. At the first level, looking at the life of this Imam, our 11th holy Imam, it's very important for us to notice a few things. As you recall, I mentioned last time, maybe about a few weeks ago, when we were talking about the istishhad of the Imam, the same Imam, we discussed this idea that it was an era in time, if you look around the globe during the lifespan of this Imam, about the decades of 840, 850, 860, 870, this area of time, AD, during this time you find that this is when the Imam is living in the world. And at that time, you have different things going on. In particular, Europe, for example, is breaking into factions. The kingdoms are becoming more factionized. And eventually what's happening is this is giving rise to the modern realm of what becomes Europe eventually. And so in this environment, we said a few things that are noteworthy. Now coming specifically, we said that last time, specifically to this Imam, you'll find that of course his father is the 10th Imam, Imam al-Hadi, and of course the diversity of the later Imams is also noteworthy. In particular, you'll find that this notion of the wife of the Imam and the mother of the Imam of our time, some say is, she was during the time, she was from Nubia. Nubia would be modern day southern Egypt, northern Sudan, this area, the kingdoms that used to be there. So there's diversity in the later Imams. Now, having said this, the narrations say that the Imam took on the mantle of the Imamat approximately at the age of 22, which seems to be a young age, and he was living in this world up to about the age of 27, or some say 28. So this comes to the question about the length of life. The Imam does not live a very long life, as we would call it, for example, in our world. But it's important for us to keep in mind the impact that he had, and life should not be measured solely by number of years. It's very possible that someone lives a short span of life and they become immortal, and somebody lives a very long span of life and yet they're not mentioned by society, or maybe they even did harm to society. You'll find in light of this painting of this time, also realize the Imam is living during the time of Banu Abbas. Banu Abbas are the ones who came to power after Banu Umayyah. And when they came to power after Banu Umayyah, when you look at their politics and you look at the politics of today, you'll find many similarities. In fact, you'll find that those games don't really change. The actors change, the people who play the games may change, but some of the tools and tactics have always been used. For example, when it came to these people, Banu Abbas, they were going against Banu Umayyah, and they came to power saying one thing publicly and doing something completely different privately. So for example, publicly they said, we will restore the rights back to the Ahlul Bayt. That's how they got into power. That was their campaign slogan. You know, campaign slogans in our world, people don't remember these things. But even Make America Great Again is not a new slogan. It was a very old slogan for those who remember in the 80s. And these are recycled because people have short-term memories. Similarly, at that time, the campaign slogan of the Abbasids was that, you know, we'll give the rights back to the Ahlul Bayt. But of course, it was something to get votes, essentially, to get into power. And when they got into power, they did anything but. It was all a facade thereafter. So this is a political theater that happened. So this was one aspect. But these also later tyrants, during the time of these Imams, they were also the ones who tried to destroy Karbala numerous times. In fact, in some narrations, upwards of 50 times, they tried to have animals run over the shrine. I mean, they had waters, sources, irrigation sources funneled towards the shrines in order to destroy them. But the reality of the matter is that you can try what you may, but as Bibi Zainab said to Yazid, no matter how hard you try, you can never eliminate our love from the hearts of the people, and how true it is. So keeping these two things in mind, that it's possible that someone lives a short span of life, and yet they're known forever. And then when it comes to this idea of someone trying to destroy the name of the Ahlul Bayt, they may go down the drain, but nobody may even remember them. On both sides, some poetry that brings this to light. The poet says, Husn ka asma hai akbar, khud mujassam azan hai akbar. Ali Akbar, the son of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, who's a symbol of youth in some sense. Whether you take the riwayah of he's 18 or 26, whatever it was, he was young. And this idea that he is also immortal at the same time, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made arrangements that Ali Akbar, whenever we hear of him, although we hear the tragedy, we also associate youth with him. You know, everybody wants to be immortal. Everyone wants to live forever. Everyone wants to live and drink from the fountain of youth, as they call it. So this idea comes forward. And so the poet says, Husn ka asma hai akbar, khud mujassam azan hai akbar, aur 14 sadiyan guzar gayi phir bhi, tu abhi tak jawan hai akbar. 1400 years have passed, Akbar, you're still young, you're still youthful. This is one aspect. The other aspect of it, the poet says in a beautiful way, in another lines of poetry, where he says, those people who may be against against Sayyid al-Shuhada, against the Ahlul Bayt. And so the poet says, Jahan mein silsilaye khushko tar Husain ka hai ashk logon ke lekin asar Husain ka hai, aur yazidiyat tere mathe pe jo pasina hai, khuda ka khauf nahi hai, ye dar Husain ka hai. Khuda ka khauf nahi hai, ye dar Husain ka hai. And this is why I gave the line, I gave you the zahma to tell you this line, which is, Tu choti choti azadariyon se khaif tha. Throughout times, there have been people who are against azah. Sometimes people said, we won't let julus go through here, we won't allow this to happen, we won't allow that to happen. And so the poet says, Tu choti choti azadariyon se khaif tha, aba ke dekh ye sara nagar Husain ka hai. Now come and see this whole town, this whole city, this whole valley, this whole street, this is all Husain's. Yesterday you were complaining about one aspect. You know, the reality of what Husainiyat is, what Imam Hussein alayhi salam is, it's not something that is the opposite of fragile. It's actually anti-fragile, as in it is the opposite of fragile in totality. There was a writer, his name is Nasim Nicholas Talib, and he wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, which is a fascinating read. And he said, I looked in the English dictionary for the opposite of fragile. So fragile is something, you know, when you're transporting things, you're going on a flight, they stamp fragile on your luggage or something. Fragile is something you apply pressure and it breaks. Now, the opposite, sometimes people say, fragile is robust. Robust is what? Robust is if you apply pressure, it does not break. But that's not if you think deeply, that's not the opposite of fragile. The opposite of fragile is something you apply pressure, it gets stronger. And in this vein, you'll find the love and the zikr of Sayyid al-Shuhada is anti-fragile. The more pressure you apply to it, the bigger it gets, the stronger it gets. This is what's the essence of the miracle of Sayyid al-Shuhada, in my humble opinion, and the love of him. So what happened? Imam's living a short period of time, but what he did lasts the test of time, number one. Number two, the people who tried to destroy Karbala, they themselves became destroyed, and Karbala still stands and will remain standing, because that's the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What Sayyid al-Shuhada did was for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if you're trying to basically fight the representative of Allah, you're fighting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you take your odds on that. So the first element of the Imam's time is his short lifespan. He teaches us that in a short lifespan you can accomplish much. Which brings me to the second aspect of the Imams. There's one aspect which I began with, which is the story of hope. You know, there's an old saying that ummeed pe dunya qaim hai, right? This idea that the world is existing on hope, because there's a hope for a better day, a better world, a better future. Similarly, the Imam teaches us this as well. The time in which the Imam is existing is a difficult time. He's under heavy surveillance. He can't go out in public openly, freely, without spies around him. They have complete surveillance around the Imam. And in this environment, there was a very, very interesting strategy that the Imam took and implemented for you and I to understand. Which brings me to the second question, which is, how do we live life? You know, sometimes, as we are students of the University of Imam Hussein in Karbala, and no doubt that Imam Hussein's movement gives us life in the spiritual sense and otherwise. But his approach is not the only approach in the school of the Ahlul Bayt. And you'll find that some of the Imams, for example, Imam al-Baqir, for example, Imam al-Sadiq, they implemented and they used the university and education approach. And then there was other Imams who had to wait patiently. And they were sowing seeds for the future. You may ask, and may categorize Imam Askari, you may categorize Imam Askari as one of them. Imam Kazim may be another one, for example, his being in arrest for so long. But the idea being that when it comes to movements, if you look at our world in America, there was a time where slavery was rampant in America. And there were many people who fought to abolish slavery, but they're not remembered. But they did lay the seeds and plant the seeds for that to happen. For example, another example that you'll come to in the 20th century, maybe the likes of Mandela. Nelson Mandela spent many decades in prison, as you're aware. But before him, there may have been many other people who struggled, either in South Africa or in other parts of Africa or the world, who struggled, and their names are not remembered to history. But they also contributed to that achievement, for example. And if you go further down the line, when it comes to what's going on in the Middle East today, there may be many names that we don't remember, society doesn't remember, but in the long bend, they will have a role in which they played in order for that success to come to fruition when it does. And hopefully we see it, inshallah, in our lifetimes. Having said that, the Imam teaches us something else. Now, if you recall from last lecture, I'm picking up exactly where I left off there. Imam's circumstances, Banu Abbas knows that there are riwayat that the 12th Imam will come. The Rasulullah has said it. So they are making preparations. When they're making preparations, sometimes opposition makes more preparation than the believers themselves. If you go today to the Middle East, there are some people who are making preparations with red heifers. You know this? These types of cows and things of this nature. And they may believe more about signs than you and I may believe. Maybe. And the idea being, at that time also, Banu Abbas knew more and they were implementing more of what the riwayat were saying. They were following it to a T. And so they wanted to keep the Imam in surveillance. They would even keep the women of the family in surveillance to make sure if any of them were expecting, there would be heavier surveillance. They wanted to make sure that they controlled this environment as much as possible. So now, when this happened, eventually there comes a moment in time in this environment, in this state, where eventually the Imam is faced with a reality where what does he tell his companions to do? And you may hear this and you may say, how is this? The Imam would tell his Shias, if you see me in public, do not say salam to me. Now imagine how difficult that may be. In fact, the reality is that because the Imam said, I'll pass by, I won't be affected, but you will be affected because they'll make your life a big problem because they're going to put you under surveillance and your family. So the Imam said, don't do this, number one. Number two, the Shia were known to wear a ring on their right finger. The Imam told them, don't do this, wear it on your left. And so people are like wondering what's going on here. So now, by the way, this also happened in earlier Imams' times. Example, if you look at Mukhtar, you know Mukhtar ibn Abi Ubaid al-Thaqafi, the one who tried to take revenge after Karbala within what human capacity was possible. If you look at the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt, you will find that there are riwayat for him and against him. There are both. But our ulama have different istidlals and discussions on this. So for example, one of the things that Sayyid Khouyi says, that for example, which ones are in taqayya? The ones that are in favor of Mukhtar or the ones that are against Mukhtar? And one of the istidlals that they say is, when the Imam was brought the head of Hurmala bin Kahil, the one who killed Ali ibn al-Asghar, and he seemingly, he didn't condemn it outright, and he didn't say this is haram or anything of that nature, that shows that the Imam would never allow for some haram act to go unopposed, which indicates that that was the right one, and the ones where the Imam was speaking seemingly negatively against Mukhtar, those would be in taqayya. So if you're following me, the Imams also had multiple approaches. First example. Second example, Zurara. Zurara is something that our general Muslim brothers say, you don't even know your own belief system properly. That you say Zurara was a good companion, whereas your own Imams have given statements against him. This is where the Imams had a Amma policy and a Khassa policy. Amma policy meaning general public policy. Khassa policy meaning particulars. Meaning what? When Zurara's own son, now Zurara was a companion during the time of the 4th, 5th, 6th Imam. Zurara's son came to the 6th Imam, he said, Yabna Rasulillah, people make fun of us. People say that your father says he was loyal to the Ahlul Bayt, but the Ahlul Bayt distanced themselves from him themselves. And so, this is where you need a heart to be a mu'min. The heart of a mu'min is you don't care about anything and anyone except what your Imam wants and what Allah wants, which are connected. And that may be even your challenges to be looked at down in the people's eyes. This is not new, by the way, right? The Shia, some of the Shia of the people who said they followed the Imam Hassan, when Imam Hassan did the peace treaty with Muawiyah, some of them called him what? As-salamu alayka ya mudhill al-mu'minin. He said, oh, salam on you, oh, the one who dishonored the believers. These are his own followers, some of them were saying this to Imam Hassan. Now, keeping that in mind, Zurara, his son said, look, I want clarification from you, Yabna Rasulillah. I don't really care what other people are saying. They're making fun, they're mocking. What's your view? And the Imam looks back and he says, look, we did for your father, Zurara, what Khidr did with the boats, with the story of Musa. That is, he was right, he was on the right path. He said, Ibn Rasulullah, what do you mean? The same way that Khidr drilled a hole in a good boat in order for it to be preserved, and Musa didn't recognize at that time what was the wisdom behind it, similarly, we publicly gave a statement against Zurara at that time so that people would distance themselves or not think that we were connected. Because if they thought we were connected, he would not be able to do the good work that he's doing, and it was a strategic way in order to keep the message alive. So Zurara was good, but publicly the Imams at times gave these statements. Now come to the time of Imam Askari, come back to this time. And you'll notice that the Imam seemingly inverted what was going on, and he was telling them to not do public things that show that you are Shia. Why? Because it's a miracle, believe me, it's a miracle that you and I can call ourselves Shias today. Based on how much persecution has taken place for centuries. You know, Amal, Jabal Amal is a place in Lebanon. There's many of our scholars who have been named Amali, for example, historically, right? And so, this is a place where Shias have faced heavy persecution for centuries. There's, different mounts there where, if I had time, I would tell you the history of the persecution. And this idea is that it's a miracle that Shiism has survived. Much of it is because of the strategic moves of the Imams to ensure that Shias survive by not always going to the battlefield and causing unnecessary bloodshed. So this was a strategic element. And so it's important to keep in mind, even when people are looking for guidance in politics and economics and societal questions today, you may find that the Imams have a policy where it's more complex than just a straightforward black and white approach. The Imams tell us, for example, show us, not tell us, they show us that in terms of the difficult times, you may need to survive. And we have riwayat like this, that the state towards Akhirul Zaman, towards the reappearance of the Imam, may be such that a believer is hiding under a rock and they're still found and attacked. And so these are difficulties which will emerge. And in that environment, it was the wisdom of the Imams that shows us how to approach these things. So the Imam shows us how at times you stand and fight, and at times you implicitly work. So what was the Imam doing during this time? He was sowing the seeds of marja'iyah that we benefit from today. And there's no doubt that throughout the centuries, the Maraji have played a big role in preserving Shi'ism. If, as honest, I mean, people can have criticisms of them today, and within the daira of adab and the bounds of respect, that's fine in academic discourse, but there's not much denying that throughout the centuries, one of the major pillars of Tashayyu have been the scholarship, vast majority of whom are sincere, honest, pious people. Not my words. In fact, you'll find scholars of Ahl Sunnah who say, for example, Maulana Ishaq Madani, who passed away a few years ago, he said that I've studied them. In fact, you know what he said? Sunni scholar. He said that I was the #1 authority in my country on the Ahmadi movement. He said, against the Ahmadi movement, Qadiani movement. And he said, my teacher used to tell me, if you ever want to study, if you ever want to refute someone, study them. So he said, I studied them inside out, and I became the #1 authority in the country against them. That was his view. He said, after I had tackled this one group, my next group that I wanted to tackle was the Shi'as. And he said, I had to do the same thing. I had to study them inside out. And once I studied them inside out, then I could refute them. He said, the more I studied them, the more I realized that they are Muslims of a first rate. In fact, he said, I have studied their ulama, and he said, their ulama are mountains of taqwa. These are his terms, not my word. Taqwa ke pahar, those are the words that he said. And so it's important for us to realize that our scholars have done a huge service throughout time. So number one, and the Imam laid that foundation. Remember, those people, especially the first ones, the ones who were the nawab or naibin of the Imam in Ghaibat al-Sughra of our 12th Imam, were first had a relationship with the 11th Imam. And so it's important for us to note those things. So it's possible that in your lifetime, you are faced with a scenario where things don't seem so clear and they don't seem so perfect, but maybe your job, my job, is to sow the seeds for a better world for our children, for our grandchildren, for the people who will come down the line. The Imams also show us this form of Shi'ism. You may not always see the fruits in your lifetime. Nuh, how many years was he propagating? Ibrahim, how many years? Musa, how many years? It was the fruition that came and the culmination that came with Rasulullah that eventually came. And even Rasulullah had to see his work go away after only a few decades. In front of his eyes, he saw this coming. And so all of these things, Imam Hussein on the 61st year of Hijrah, his life is zahiri, is taken from this world. But the movement of Karbala, I'll ask Imam Hussein in the world to come see how his name spreads around the world today. Sometimes you don't see the fruits of your labor in your life, but the Imam shows us it's still worthwhile to benefit, to put that implementation while you're alive. The next and final element of the third question is the story of Ishaq al-Kindi, which you've heard many times, but I invite you to hear it with new eyes. You know, and this may help for those who are interested in getting into the Ivy Leagues. I was reading not too long ago, one of the essay questions that Harvard implemented was, especially in light of what's going on in the Middle East, they didn't explicitly necessarily say that, but the different views, they said, how do you disagree with others? This is one of the questions, the prompts that they ask. Do you know how to disagree with others? By the way, in Islam, in Islamic akhlaq, there's an adab of disagreement. You know the ayah of the Quran, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'idatil hasana wajadil billati hiya ahsan." That invite people towards the word with the kind exhortation. "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah," with wisdom. Invite people to the word of your Lord with wisdom. And debate with them, discuss with them in the best of ways. So Allah also knows the psychology. What did Allah say to Musa? When Musa was going towards Fir'aun, Allah said, idhab. He said, no, go towards Fir'aun. Idhab ila Fir'aun, innahu tagha. He says, Musa, Allah says to Musa, go towards Fir'aun. He has transgressed. But how do I talk to him? How do you talk to him? Allah says, qawla layyana. Use a soft tone. Don't use a harsh tone. Because Allah knows sometimes that the tyrant, the zalim, when they're faced with pressure, they become more zalim. They double down. So the same thing happened. The Imam shows us how to do, and I'm concluding here, how to bring everything to a fruition. Ishaq al-Kindi, during that time, wrote a book called Contradictions in the Quran. And then the Imam told his khassa, his close companions, why don't you refute him? Why don't you respond to him? Why don't you say something to him? They said, Ibn Rasulullah, what do we do? He said, very well, I'll tell you. One of you become an apprentice to him. Get a close relationship. Build a relationship with him first. He said, and then ask him a question. I'll give you the question, you ask him the question. So one of the students went, or one of the companions went, became a student, an apprentice, and at that time he built a relationship. He said, I'll, be an apprentice to you, I'll maybe sweep, I'll give you tea, and you teach me, and I learn from you. And he developed this relationship. And eventually that book that was a manuscript, it's not like today, people have multiple copies, you protected your work, it's your life's work. So he said, can I please see that book that you've written after a while? The student says, he says, well, I've dedicated my whole life, I can't give it to you. He says that, it's a voluminous work. He says, can I just read it? By the way, this is another principle. The Imam is showing us that before you criticize something, at least read it. Today we criticize things we don't read. You have to read something to understand what is being said. If it's something to criticize, it's something to criticize, no problem. But first at least read it. So now, when this happens, he builds this relationship, he says, okay, fine, I'll give it to you for an hour or two, that's it, or some time, I can't give it to you longer. The Imam said, ask this question to him. Is it possible that an author writes a book, and the person who reads the book, and is it possible that the interpretation and the understanding that the reader gets is different than the intention of the author? Is it possible? Ishaq al-Kindi, who was the biggest scholar of the time, he was stumped. He said, what? He said, where did you get this question? He said, I just came to my mind. He said, no, I know you for some time, this is not your caliber, this came from somewhere else. Who gave you this question? He said, it came from my Imam, from the 11th Imam, Hassan Askari, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. Allah sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He said, verily that's true. And he drained the whole book in the river, by the way, because he understood that it's possible that sometimes the issue is not in the book. Even today people say that there's an issue, maybe if someone says there's an issue in the book of Allah, how is it that maybe the issue is in my understanding of the book of Allah. It's not necessarily that the Quran is to blame. Nonetheless, the conviction that this one question and dalil gave to the mind of Ishaq al-Kindi made it such that eventually he became one of the staunchest Shia and followers of Ahlul Bayt. To the point when the Abbasid ruler, who he used to tutor, Ishaq al-Kindi used to tutor his children. And he asks him one day in a state of drunkenness, he says, are my children more afdal or Hassan and Hussein, the grandchildren of Rasulullah? And he became in a state of rage. He couldn't take it. He said, you're asking if your children are greater or Hassan and Hussein, Hassanain, the children of Rasulullah, the children of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, your children don't even compare to the children of Qambar. They don't even compare to Qambar himself, the servant of Abu Abdullah, the servant of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the servant of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He was enraged. They say they cut out his tongue, Ishaq al-Kindi's tongue. And as the poet says, and I've drawn to a conclusion here, that the idea being that you can cut out people's tongues, you can try to destroy their shrines, but haqq is haqq. And haqq will always fly high. The flag of haqq will always fly high. Faraz-e dar se misam bayan dete hain. Faraz-e dar is a height. Faraz and dar is the stake where they kill people essentially. Faraz-e dar se misam. Now you'll recall, Misam at-Tammar was also killed for his love of the Ahlul Bayt. Imam Ali told him, this tree is where you'll be killed, and he used to water the tree. Imagine the love and the conviction that these individuals had. It's for these people are one of the main pillars as to why Tashayyu is alive. Their conviction, their love. And so whether it's Misam or whether it's Ishaq al-Kindi, all those people who gave their lives, they give us a lesson. And the poet encapsulates it. And he says, Faraze dar se Misam bayan dete hain, Faraze dar se Misam bayan dete hain, aur rahega zikr Ali hum zuban dete hain. He says that I'm saying from his death statement, the statement that he's saying right before his death, he's saying that I'm giving. In Urdu, it's even more beautiful because you give someone your word, your tongue, and he literally gave his tongue, Ishaq al-Kindi, for example. And so you realize that that's one aspect of the equation, that you can never wipe out that love of the Ahlul Bayt because those people were heroes of truth and wisdom. A final few lines of poetry in honor of Imam Askari as it relates to Imam Zaman, the Imam of our time. Remember, the Imam that we're commemorating is the father of the Imam of our time. And so the poet says, "Ay Bagh-e Askari ke muqaddas tareen phool," garden of Askari, the most beautiful flower from it. "Ay Bagh-e Askari ke muqaddas tareen phool, ay Kaaba-e furu-e nazar qibla-e usool, آ ہم سے کر خراج دل و جاں کبھی وصول اور تیرے بغیر ہم کو قیامت نہیں قبول دنیا نہ مال و زر نہ وزارت کے واسطے دنیا نہ مال و زر نہ وزارت کے واسطے ہم جی رہے ہیں تیری زیارت کے واسطے دنیا نہ مال و زر that not for this dunya, not for wealth, not for jewelry, not for wizarat, not even for any ministership, we are living, oh Imam of our time, or Sahib al-Asr, for your ziyarah in order to see you. And that is the ultimate gift that Imam Askari has given us and the world ultimately. And we pray that we see his appearance. Ya Ali, Ali. And we pray that we see his reappearance. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept this ibadah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all those who are here listening or wherever they may be by the barakah of the birth of the 11th Imam to give us his most choicest blessings on this eve. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the barakah of this Imam, allow us to make our lives and the magnitude of our lives worthy, weighty, and measure us by our accomplishments in your cause, Ya Allah. Measure us and allow us to live on the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt and ultimately allow us to see the zuhur of the Imam of our time who will eradicate much of the oppression and the dhulm that we see in the world, inshaAllah. A final request, if you can please recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for your marhameen, for our marhameen, for the marhameen of all those who make these programs possible, as well as for those who do not have someone to recite a Fatiha for them this night. Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Allahumma salli.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد رقص روی کے لیے ہے نفسری کے لیے رقص روی کے لیے ہے نفسری کے لیے زبان باقی ہے بس مدح ہے عسکری کے لیے زبان باقی ہے بس مدح ہے عسکری کے لیے اگر نہ ملتی انہیں نور اگر نہ ملتی انہیں نور عسکری کی زکات ترستے چاند ستارے بھی روشنی کے لیے ترستے چاند ستارے بھی روشنی کے لیے گرایا آپ کا روزہ گرایا آپ کا روزہ جنہوں نے اے مولا شکار پہلا بنیں گے وہ آخری کے لیے شکار پہلا بنیں گے وہ آخری کے لیے امام پھر سے بلائے امام پھر سے بلائے ہمیں بھی سامرا ترس رہی ہے جبھی کب سے بندگی کے لیے ترس رہی ہے جبھی کب سے بندگی کے لیے یہ بولے دار پہ میسم یہ بولے دار پہ میسم میں کیسے رک جاؤں زبان ملی ہے مجھے جب علی کے لیے زبان ملی ہے مجھے جب علی کے لیے علی کو دیکھ کے بالی پہ علی کو دیکھ کے بالی پہ میں پکاروں گا اے میری موت ٹھہر جا تو دو گھڑی کے لیے اے میری موت ٹھہر جا تو دو گھڑی کے لیے ہمیں ہے فخر کہ ہم ان کے ہمیں ہے فخر کہ ہم ان کے در کے نوکر ہے فرشتے خود جہاتے ہیں نوکری کے لیے فرشتے خود جہاں آتے ہیں نوکری کے لیے نہ خسروی کے لیے ہے نہ افسری کے لیے ज़बान बाकी है बस मद है अस्करी के लिए। मोहम्मद व आल मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु।
زيارة.
توجه للزيارة. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، خصوصا سيدي ومولاي أبا الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا تسة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس وانيس النفوس، أيها المدفون بأرض طوس الراضي بالقدر والقضاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب الأس والزمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وزهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.